I was standing at the kitchen counter rinsing the last of the dinner dishes when my phone buzzed on the cutting board. He was my financial advisor, a man named Conrad Pelletier, who had managed my affairs for the better part of 22 years and who had never, in all that time, sent me a text message after 7 in the evening. The message was 4 words: "Do not sign anything." I stood there with water still running over my hands and read it again. Then I dried my fingers on the dish towel, turned off the tap, and called him. He picked up before the second ring. "Frank." His voice was low, the way it gets when he is delivering bad news at a client meeting. "I need you to listen carefully. Your daughter came into the office today. She brought a man I didn't recognize and a document she wanted me to witness. It was a continuing power of attorney over your personal finances and your property on Ridgeline Road. She told my assistant you had asked her to handle it. She told me you were showing signs of dementia." The pot I had been about to put away stayed in my hand. "She said the family doctor had already assessed you," Conrad continued. "She had a letter. Letterhead, signature, the whole thing. Frank. It looked legitimate. But something felt wrong. She was in a hurry. She kept checking her watch, so I stalled. I said I needed to verify a few things and I would call her in the morning. The moment they left, I called you. I set the pot down on the stove, very carefully, the way you set something down when you are afraid of what your hands might do if they are not occupied. She told you I have dementia," I said. "That's what the letter says." I thanked him. I told him not to call her back. I told him I would explain everything tomorrow. Then I hung up and stood in the kitchen of the house I had built with my own hands, 31 years ago, listening to the furnace hum in the basement, and the snow beginning to tap against the window above the sink. My daughter had just tried to take everything I own, and she had done it while I was washing dishes 40 minutes away, completely unaware. Her name is Wendy. She is 43 years old. She has her mother's eyes and, as it turns out, none of her mother's conscience. Her husband, a man I will call my son-in-law because I cannot bring myself to use his name with any civility, is a former mortgage broker who has been between positions, as he likes to say, for going on 3 years. Between positions. That is what you call it when you have burned through your savings, leveraged your house to invest in something that evaporated, and are now depending on a father-in-law's silence to survive. I should have seen it sooner. The signs were there. 6 weeks ago, Wendy started calling every other day. Long calls, full of questions about how I was sleeping, whether I was eating properly, whether I had thought any more about selling the property and moving somewhere smaller. She mentioned a retirement community in Barrie 3 times in 1 week. She said it had a lovely dining room and organized activities. She said it would be so much easier for everyone if I was closer. Easier for everyone. 3 weeks ago, my son-in-law asked me, very casually over Sunday dinner, whether I had updated my will recently. He said it with the tone of a man who had rehearsed the question in the car on the way over. I said I had a lawyer who handled all of that. He said, of course, he was just asking, because these things slip through the cracks as people get older. I looked at him across the table, and I thought about the mortgage on their house in Oakville, and I changed the subject. 2 weeks ago, Wendy mentioned a Dr. Hargrove. She said he was a geriatric specialist, very well regarded, and that she had taken the liberty of booking me an appointment for routine cognitive assessment. Just a checkup, she said. Peace of mind. I told her I had a family doctor and I did not need a specialist. She said I was being stubborn. I said I was being reasonable. We left it at that. Now I knew what that appointment had really been for. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window in the living room and watched the snow come down over the yard, over the old maple tree I planted the year Wendy was born, over the garden beds that were dormant now but would be full of peonies and black-eyed Susans by June. My wife Lorraine had planned those beds. She had spent an entire spring weekend on her knees in the dirt, mapping them out, deciding what would go where. She died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I thought about Lorraine that night. I thought about what she would have said if she had known. I already knew. She would have been heartbroken. And then she would have been furious. And then, in that quiet way she would have said, "Handle it properly, Frank. Don't let them make you small." By morning, I had a plan. I called Conrad at 8 and told him everything. I called my lawyer, a woman named Beverly Ashworth, who has been practicing family and estate law in this city for 30 years, and I told her everything, too. Beverly listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Frank, this is elder financial abuse. It is a criminal offense under the Criminal Code of Canada. If they forged that doctor's letter or obtained it fraudulently, we are looking at fraud over 5,000, which carries up to 14 years. I asked her what she needed from me. She said, "Tell me about this Dr. Hargrove." I gave her the name. She said she would make some calls. What she found by that afternoon was not reassuring. Dr. Harv had a practice in a strip mall on the edge of the city, sandwiched between a tax preparation office and a vaping shop. He had received a formal caution from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario 2 years ago for issuing prescriptions without proper assessment. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a specialist in anything. He was a man who needed money and was not particular about how he got it. My son-in-law had found him. Of course he had. Beverly said we needed the original assessment document. She said we needed to establish that it was obtained under false pretenses and that the signatures were either forged or procured through misrepresentation. She said the cleanest way to do this was to let them try to use it. Let them proceed, she said. Catch them in the act. I told her I understood. I told her I could do that. What I did not tell her was that I had already decided I was going to let them do more than proceed. I was going to let them believe they had won. I was going to give them enough rope to build a very tidy gallows. That evening, Wendy called. She was warm, almost excessively warm, the way she gets when she wants something and is trying not to show it. She asked how I was feeling. I told her my memory had been a little foggy lately. I told her I had misplaced my keys twice this week. I let my voice go soft and a bit uncertain at the edges, the way she wanted it to sound. She said she was worried about me. I said I knew she was. I said it was a comfort to have family looking out for me. She said she would come by on Saturday with my son-in-law to help me go through some of the paperwork that had been piling up. Just to help sort things, she said. Nothing overwhelming. I said that would be lovely. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I called my pension administrator at my old firm and had a flag placed on the account so that any changes to beneficiaries or withdrawal instructions would trigger an automatic hold and notification to Beverly. I contacted my bank and put a verbal password on the account that only I knew. I called a locksmith and had a second lock put on the office at the back of the house, where I keep my files in my safe. Then I went to a store on Dundas Street and bought a small digital recorder, the kind that looks like a pen. I charged it overnight and tested it in the kitchen, speaking at a normal conversational volume, and when I played it back, the words were perfectly clear. Saturday came cold and bright, the kind of February morning in Ontario that looks beautiful through a window and punishes you the moment you step outside. Wendy arrived with my son-in-law just after 10. She was carrying a bag from Tim Hortons, 2 coffees and a box of Timbits, which under other circumstances would have been a kind gesture. Under these circumstances, it felt like the flowers they put on the table before they read you the bad news. My son-in-law shook my hand. His grip was firm in the way of a man who has been told that a firm handshake projects confidence. We sat at the kitchen table. Wendy poured the coffee. I wrapped my hands around the cup and stared into it for a moment too long, performing the distraction of a man not entirely present. "Dad," Wendy said, "we wanted to talk to you about something important. We've been so worried about you living out here alone. It's a lot of house to manage. The driveway alone." "I hired a fellow to plow," I said. I let a small frown cross my face as if I was trying to remember something. What's his name? Young man. With the red truck. My son-in-law exchanged a look with Wendy over the rim of his coffee cup. Quick. Practiced. They had rehearsed this. That's exactly what we mean, he said, leaning forward, all concern and reasonableness. It's little things like that. Forgetting names, getting confused. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Frank. It happens to everyone eventually. We just want to make sure you're protected. I nodded slowly. I let my shoulders drop a little. He reached into the bag he had brought and set a folder on the table. Pale blue. The kind you buy at Staples. He opened it with the careful hands of a man who has been told by someone, probably Wendy, to seem unhurried and calm. This is just a simple document, he said. It lets Wendy help you manage your finances and the property, bills, insurance, that kind of thing. It takes a load off your plate. And if anything ever happened to you, if you had a fall or a health episode, she'd be able to step in right away without any delays. I looked at the document. It was a continuing power of attorney for property and personal care, signed at the bottom with what was meant to look like Dr. Hargrove's signature. Below that was a line for my signature. It was not a simple document. It was a complete transfer of legal and financial control over my life. It looks like a lot of pages, I said. I picked up a corner of it and let it fall back down. I don't know. I'd want to read it first. My eyes aren't so good in the mornings. That's fine, Dad. Wendy reached over and patted my hand. We can read it together. It's all standard language. It just means I can be there for you. My son-in-law uncapped a pen and set it on the table beside the folder. A nice pen. Parker. Silver. He had come prepared. I reached out slowly, as if to take it. I let my fingers close around the barrel. I watched them both lean forward almost imperceptibly, the way people lean toward something they very much want. Then I set the pen back down. I'd like another coffee first, I said. My throat is dry. Wendy stood up immediately, relieved to have something to do. While she was at the counter with her back to me, I reached across, as if adjusting the folder, and switched on the recorder in my breast pocket. We spent another hour at that table. They pushed. I drifted. I asked questions about things I understood perfectly and pretended not to follow the answers. I said I was tired. I said my head hurt. I said I wanted to call my friend Murray to ask him if he'd ever heard of this kind of arrangement. You don't need Murray, Dad, Wendy said. Her voice had gone a shade tighter. This is just family business. My son-in-law checked his phone twice. Finally, I set down my cup and said I was sorry. I just couldn't concentrate today. Could we do this next weekend instead? I said I would look over the papers in the meantime. Wendy's jaw tightened, but she smiled. She said, of course. She said she'd call me Thursday to check in. They drove away at noon. I stood at the window and watched the red taillights of their car disappear at the end of the laneway. Then I went to the phone and called Beverly. I told her I had the document. I told her I had the conversation on tape. I told her they were coming back next Saturday. She said, Frank, this is enough for criminal charges right now. I want you to know that. I said I knew. I said I wanted one more week. I said there was something I needed to do first. On Monday morning, I called my bank and spoke with the branch manager, a straightforward woman who had handled the accounts since before Lorraine died. I explained what was happening. I did not dramatize it. I gave her Beverly's name and number. Together we flagged the accounts and established a protocol. Any attempt to use the power of attorney document as authorization for account access would trigger an immediate call to Beverly and to the fraud division of the OPP. Then I called a private investigator, a retired RCMP corporal whose name Conrad had given me some months ago when a business matter had required his services. I told him about Dr. Hargrove. I asked him to find out how my son-in-law and Hargrove had made contact, whether money had changed hands, and whether there were any other families Hargrove had done this for. He called back Wednesday. The news was methodical and ugly. My son-in-law had found Hargrove through a private Facebook group, the kind of closed group that exists in murky corners of social media, where people exchange tips on what the investigator called gray market services. Hargrove had charged $3,000 for the assessment and the letter. He had done this for at least 2 other families in the past 18 months. One of those families had already filed a complaint with the college. The investigator had it all documented. I sat with that information for a while. $3,000. That was the price my son-in-law had paid to have me declared incompetent. I thought about the years I had watched him across dinner tables and holiday gatherings. I thought about the times I had quietly covered costs that he didn't know I knew about. The property tax shortfall 2 winters ago. The gap in their car payments the spring before that. I had done those things without being asked, without saying a word, because I believed that was what family was. You fill the gaps. You don't make people feel small. I thought about how he had used that against me. I called Beverly again. I told her everything the investigator had found. She said she needed 2 days to prepare the filings. She said she would coordinate with the OPP's Financial Crimes Unit. She said she wanted everything to happen on Saturday. Thursday, as promised, Wendy called. I was warm. I was slightly foggy. I said I had looked at the papers, and I thought I understood them now. I said Saturday would be fine. I said I was looking forward to seeing her. When I hung up, I went to the kitchen and made myself a bowl of soup and sat at the table where 2 days earlier they had tried to dismantle my life over Tim Horton's coffee. I ate the soup. I washed the bowl. I was 67 years old, and I had spent 40 of those years building something that was worth protecting. I was going to protect it. Saturday came gray and still. No snow, just the flat, cold light of a February afternoon that doesn't seem to have a source. They arrived at 1 o'clock. This time my son-in-law had also brought a man I had never met, introduced to me as a friend who was a notary. The notary was in his 50s, overdressed for the occasion, and would not quite meet my eyes. He carried a soft leather folio under his arm. I offered them all tea. I moved slowly. I left the tea steeping a little too long and apologized about it with the vague distress of someone who has forgotten how to calibrate small things. My son-in-law placed the folder on the table. Fresh copy, I noticed. Same document. Dad, Wendy said, we brought someone to make it official, so there's no confusion later, so everything is clear and above board. Above board. She said it without flinching. The notary opened his folio. He explained, in the careful tones of a man who had decided not to ask too many questions, that he would witness my signature and confirm that I had signed of my own free will. My son-in-law placed the Parker pen on the table again. I looked at it. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the man who was supposed to be my family by marriage. And then I heard a vehicle on the laneway. Actually, 2 vehicles. Wendy turned her head toward the window. A frown crossed her face. Are you expecting someone, Dad? Yes, I said. My voice was clear and steady, the tremor entirely gone. I am. The first one through the door was Beverly. She was wearing her work coat and carrying her briefcase, and she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who has been winning difficult cases for 3 decades and is not remotely interested in pleasantries. Behind her came a uniformed officer from the OP and a second officer in plain clothes who introduced himself as being from the Financial Crimes Unit. Behind them came Conrad, who had driven out from the city because I had asked him to, and because in 22 years he had never let me down. My son-in-law stood up so fast his chair scraped back across the floor. What is this? He said. Not a question. A statement of a man who already knows the answer and cannot believe it is happening. This, Beverly said, setting her briefcase on the table beside his folder, is the legal consequence of what you have spent the last several weeks preparing. She opened the briefcase. She removed a sealed envelope and handed it to the officer in plain clothes. "We have a warrant," the officer said, "for the arrest of," and he used both their names, my daughter's and my son-in-law's, in the formal way that makes them sound like strangers, on charges of fraud over $5,000 and criminal breach of trust. We also have a summons for Dr. Tarr, Alan Hargrove, who is currently speaking with officers at his office. Wendy sat back down, heavily, as if her legs had made the decision before the rest of her. The notary had already closed his folio and taken a step toward the door. The plain-clothes officer told him, not unkindly, that he would need to stay. My son-in-law looked at me across the table. He had the expression of a man who is still, even now, calculating whether there is an angle he has not tried. "Frank," he said. "Frank, come on. This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to help you. Wendy was worried. We can talk about this." I looked at him for a long moment. "We are talking about it," I said. Wendy had not said anything. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, looking at a point somewhere between her coffee cup and the window. When she finally looked up at me, her face was not angry. It was something else. Something I had not seen on her before. It might have been shame, though I could not be entirely certain. With Wendy, the feelings that look like shame are sometimes just the shock of consequences. "I would never have actually hurt you," she said. Her voice was quiet. "You already did," I said. I said it without heat. It was simply the truth, and I wanted her to have it. The officers asked everyone to move into the living room. They were professional and even-tempered, the way Ontario police tend to be when a scene is already under control. Beverly spoke with them for several minutes in the kitchen. Conrad sat with me at the table while the folder with the fake document was photographed and placed into an evidence bag. I watched them do it. I watched them take the Parker pen, too. When my son-in-law was led out to the cruiser, he was still talking, his voice carrying back through the open front door. Something about how this was fixable, how everyone needed to calm down, how he knew people. The door closed behind him, and the voice stopped. Wendy came and stood in front of me before they walked her out. She was not in handcuffs yet, just flanked by the uniformed officer with a patience that said the handcuffs were not far off. "What happens now?" she asked. There was no strategy in it. It was a genuine question from someone who genuinely did not know. "Now," I said, "you go with the officer. Beverly will give you the name of a defense lawyer when you ask for one. Beyond that, it's up to the courts." "And us?" she asked. "You and me." I looked at my daughter. I looked at the woman who had her mother's eyes and who had, somewhere along the way, decided that love was a resource to be extracted rather than a thing you maintain through basic decency. "I don't know yet," I said. It was the most honest thing I had said to her in weeks. They walked her out. I stood in the doorway and watched the cruisers back down the laneway, the red and blue lights cutting through the gray February afternoon without any drama. No sirens, just the quiet efficiency of the law doing what it was built to do. Conrad touched my shoulder. "You all right?" "I will be," I said. Beverly came and stood beside us. "Hargrove has agreed to cooperate. He'll testify to the arrangement. That helps the case considerably." I nodded. "The property is safe," she said. "The accounts are untouched. We're going to file a civil claim as well, for the cost of the investigator and the legal fees. Given the evidence, I think we recover most of it." I thanked her. I thanked Conrad. I asked them both if they would like a proper cup of tea before they drove back to the city, and Beverly said she thought she had earned one. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, with good tea and the particular quiet that settles over a house after a crisis has passed through it. Outside the window, the old maple tree stood in the yard, bare and patient, the way maples are in winter. I thought about Lorraine. I thought about what she had loved about this house, the way the afternoon light came through the south-facing windows in winter, the sound the floors made when the heat came up in the morning. She would have sat right here, in the chair where Wendy had sat 2 weeks ago trying to take everything, and she would have wrapped both hands around her mug and said something measured and right. I thought I knew what she would have said. She would have said, "You did what needed doing. Now put it down and go tend something." In the weeks that followed, I put in the work Beverly had outlined. The civil claim was filed. The criminal proceedings moved forward on their schedule, which in Ontario means slowly and with considerable paperwork, but they moved. Hargrove lost his license. The College of Physicians and Surgeons moved faster than the courts, which I found grimly satisfying. My son-in-law's financial situation came fully into view during the discovery process. It was worse than I had imagined. The house in Oakville was mortgaged beyond its value. There were lines of credit, personal loans, and an investment loss from a private scheme that would not have passed the smell test of anyone paying attention. They had been drowning for 2 years and had decided, rather than asking for help or making hard choices, that the cleanest solution was to make me legally incompetent and liquidate my property. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the version of events where they had simply told me, where my son-in-law had sat across this same table and said, "We are in serious trouble and we don't know what to do." I would have helped. I would not have given them everything, but I would have helped. I would have sat with them and worked through the numbers and found a way that didn't require anyone to lose their dignity. But they had not done that. They had decided, instead, that I was the obstacle, and so I had become the solution. Just not the one they planned for. The house in Oakville was eventually sold through the proceedings. What remained after the debts were settled was modest. They were not destitute, but they were sharply reduced in the way that tends to be clarifying. Wendy called me from the detention center once, about 3 weeks after the arrest. She did not apologize. She said she hoped I understood that she had been under enormous pressure. She said my son-in-law had convinced her it was the only option. She said she needed me to tell the court that she had not acted with malicious intent. I listened. I let her finish. Then I said, "Wendy, I'm going to tell the court the truth. That's all I can offer." She hung up. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment. It was quiet in the house. The furnace hummed. Outside, the maple tree was beginning to show the first faint suggestion of buds, still weeks from anything you could call leaves, but there, unmistakably, underneath everything. That spring I hired a woman from a local nursery to help me redo the garden beds in the side yard. Lorraine's plans were still in a notebook in the kitchen drawer, and I followed them as closely as I could, though the woman from the nursery made some suggestions about drainage that I thought Lorraine would have approved of. I planted the peonies. I planted the black-eyed Susans. I put in the Russian sage along the back fence that Lorraine had always meant to get to and never had. And I called a man at the Law Society who runs a volunteer program that connects retired professionals with elderly people in the area who are dealing with financial exploitation. I had called him the week before on Beverly's recommendation. Now I called him again and told him I wanted to be more involved, not just as a donor, as someone who shows up, who sits across the table from a frightened 78-year-old woman and her confusing stack of papers and helps her understand what she is actually looking at. He said they could use someone like me. I told him I was available Tuesdays and Thursday mornings and that I made a reasonable cup of tea. Wendy's case resolved in the fall. She received a conditional sentence with probation and community service hours. My son-in-law received a more significant sentence given his role in orchestrating the scheme and his contact with Hargrove. I was not present in the courtroom for the sentencing. Beverly represented my interests and called me afterward with the details. I was in the garden when she called. The peonies were long done by then, the Russian sage still going strong along the fence, purple and silver in the October light. I listened to the sentences and I thanked Beverly for everything she had done. "Are you all right?" she asked. Same question Conrad had asked in February. "I think so," I said. Same answer. I stood there after the call, phone in my pocket, looking at what Lorraine had drawn in a notebook and what was now growing in actual soil, in actual light. The maple tree cast a long shadow across the yard in the afternoon. It was a big tree. It had been small when I planted it. Things take time, and most of the time, if you do not interfere with them, they become what they were meant to be. I was 67 years old. I had been widowed. I had been betrayed by someone I had raised and loved and would, in some complicated and private part of myself, probably always loved despite everything. I had been treated like a piece of furniture, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed, and I was still standing in my own yard, in the garden my wife designed, on the property I built and held and protected, still standing, still clear-headed, still capable of a reasonable cup of tea. People talk about family as if it is a fixed thing, as if the fact of blood creates something permanent and unbreakable. I used to believe that. I raised my daughter to believe it. What I know now is that family is not a fixed thing. It is a practice. It is what you do on an ordinary Tuesday when no one is watching and there is nothing to gain. It is whether you show up. It is whether you tell the truth. It is whether, when someone is vulnerable, you protect them or you calculate what you can take. Lorraine had practiced it every day of her life, and she had been remarkable at it. I am still learning, but I have good teachers now, sitting across tables on Tuesday mornings with their stacks of confusing papers, asking me to help them understand what they are actually looking at. That is something. That is, I think, what you do with the time that is left.